welcome the host of Epic this week, Mr. Nick Redfern.
Thank you all for joining us on Epic Voyages. I'm Nick Redfern, your host this evening. My guest is Gary Heseltine, and Gary is probably one of our most intriguing guests on the show, chiefly because of his background. Gary runs what's called the PRUFOS Police Database, PRUFOS, which you can find at prufospolicedatabase.co.uk. And Gary is a retired detective constable with the British Transport Police. He served with them from 1989 to 2013, and prior to that, served with the British Royal Air Force. And Gary has chiefly focused his UFO research on what the British police force knows about the subject and reports and encounters involving British police officers. And to date, his database goes back to 1901 and more than 400 reports involving more than 900 officers. And it's accurate to say that there's really nobody else in the UK who's doing this kind of in-depth research into such a specific field. So with that said, I'd like to welcome Gary to the show and to the guests. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you for having me as a guest.
Oh, you're very welcome, Gary. I'm kind of like you because I do guest hosting on the show and you're the guest. So we're sort of both here, I guess, sort of on occasion, so to speak. But thanks again for coming on the show. And before we sort of get to, sort of the meat of the work that you do in terms of the UFO field, can you sort of give a bit of background, a bit more expanded background on your research and, who you are, etc.?
I'm 53, I'm married, I have 2 adult children from previous relationships. I was a police officer for nearly 24 years, like you said in your introduction. Of that 24 years, I was a detective constable for about 20 years. I was an advanced interviewer of suspects and witnesses. I also did some training on interviewing as well. I began my serious UFO research in January 2002 when I launched the PRUFOS Police Database, PRUFOS being the acronym for Police Reporting UFO Sightings. And that launched with an article in the then famous publication by Graham Birdsall, which you'll know him very well, Graham Birdsall, in January 2002. So that was the first issue. That's when I launched it, and straight away there was a response of officers, mainly retired initially, and it just carried on from there, really. I started with half a dozen cases involving about 10 officers, and like you've just quoted accurately now, 11 years later, over 400 cases, and I think the last total is about 940 British police officers. So it's increased exponentially, much more than I ever imagined.
All right, cool. Now, didn't you have your own encounter that sort of, initially at least, prompted interest in these subjects, when that occurred?
Yeah, my interest stems from a childhood sighting when I was 15 in Scunthorpe, which is in Lincolnshire in England, my hometown, actually in the suburb of Ashby in Scunthorpe. And I was with my then girlfriend. We were walking home. It was a balmy August night. I'm not sure the exact date, but it was during the summer holidays between schools, as it were. And there wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was one of those few nights in England where there's no cloud, there's no wind, and you just get a load of stars out, which isn't very often. And as we were walking along a very dark, narrow footpath with what you would say in the States, high school fields on my left, and a large gardening allotment, as we would say in England, on our right, we suddenly saw all that I can describe as a bright white light. There was no distinct shape, but it was odd. It was bigger than the stars. It was about a 60-degree angle, and it moved from our right to left, and it seemed to be very odd. It didn't make any noise. We watched it, and the strange thing was that as soon as it went in front of us, if you can imagine the pathway ahead of you, it then passed over us, right to left, and basically all the housing in the distance from behind it was cut off in like a power cut. The whole area went into darkness. That frightened my then girlfriend, rightly or wrongly. I had my cycle with my bicycle at the time with me, so I said, get on the bike and I will ride you quickly to your home. That's what I did. I dropped her off. Her house was in total darkness. Everybody was getting candles out. The object was heading in the general direction of my home very slowly. And so I thought, well, if I get back on my bike and maybe take a shortcut, I can maybe get ahead of the light as it approaches my home. And that's exactly what I did. I went down the same alleyway. I rode light as fast as I could go, then rode about a mile really fast down a long straight road called Grange Lane South. And I remember a very strange experience of moving from total darkness at the point of a corner where Grange Lane South turned to the left in my direction. It was moving to the left, and I could see that the electricity was on in the distance beyond the corner, and yet I was going from total darkness and then into total light. And I remember getting to the corner, looking over my right shoulder, and by this time I was ahead of the light slightly. It was over my right shoulder, and basically what I did was I went round two more corners, dropped the bike outside my front door of my house, semi-detached house, rushed into the living room and said to my parents who were having a cup of tea, as English people do, about 8, 9 o'clock, and I said, come outside, I think there's going to be a power cut caused by this strange light. They just looked at me bemused, as you would, and basically then they didn't follow me, so I ran through the hall, ran through the kitchen, out through the back door, into the garden, turned around to look back at facing my house, just in time to see the object now moving over my rooftop. I put my arm up directly above my head, and as soon as the object went beyond me, and so therefore I was behind it, guess what? There was a power cut. And it's at that point there that I realised that light must have, in some way, from having moved to a second geographical position, of that somehow interacted with a power grid. And there you have it. I had no interest in the subject up to that point.
Wow. And did that sort of get you involved in doing research, or was it like, a case you started to read books and things like that on the subject?
Well, 1975, as you probably well remember, there wasn't really a lot. It was just prior to the Betamax and VHS era, and really all I could do was get second-hand books, and that's exactly what I did. And fortunately, the first book that I got, and I kind of look back at it and think that there's maybe some kind of synchronicity in this, was a book by Donald Kehoe, Major Don Kehoe, who was one of my heroes. One of his 5 books, Aliens Are Real, and straight away I was hearing about pilots chasing UFOs. So to me, it kind of reinforced that I'd seen something very strange. I remember for a time, that's all I did. I just got books. And then I actually joined BUFORA for a year as an associate member. And I think I had that for a couple of years, but I never did any research. I went to a local UFO group, but that didn't really appeal to me. So in terms of active research, I didn't actually do anything other than read books. I remember once opening the Scunthorpe Film Theatre and at 18 years of age, which is a bit bizarre really, having the confidence to stand in front of about 200 people in this new film theatre auditorium and introducing some famous UFO clips. The Montana and the Tremonton shots for a UFO conference. But aside from that, I didn't really do any active research until launching the database. But it was really about the mid-1990s when I came across Graham Birds's UFO magazine that reawakened my interest. So 17, 18 years later, by which time I'd been in the Air Force, I'd joined the police, I'd had a family, had children, so I'd gone away and had a life. And it was really only in the mid-90s when I came across that magazine that it reawakened my interest. And strangely, you're involved in that, Nick, because it's for you to. It's your fault, actually. I think. But basically, when I'd been away from the subject for a long time, and I reacquainted myself with all the modern books in the 90s, and of course there was Above Top Secret by Tim Good, Beyond Top Secret, and of course there was A Covert Agenda by your good self, which is still one of the best books ever written. So well done on that. And I was hooked ever since. And gradually, as the time wore on, I felt myself being drawn into wanting to get involved in some capacity.
Okay. So I guess would it be sort of fair to say a lot of it was the fact that, Graham and the magazine, it was like a like-minded community or whatever, you wanted to get involved with it and stuff?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I don't forget, I was a police officer.
Yeah.
1990s, I was 1995 when I came across the magazine. I was a police officer for 6 years at that point, and I was already a detective. So I was looking at things through evidential eyes, and what has always impressed me about the subject, and it is a very complicated subject, but what has always impressed me have been the pilot reports, because I really don't see if you can get better than a pilot chasing a UFO or opening fire at a UFO kind of thing. And those cases exist, and the public don't get to hear about them very often. And so when I read his magazine, which wasn't sensationalistic, it looked at it from a common sense point of view. It was like mine, but what a coincidence that at that time, when I started to really get interested, he was only based at Ilkley. Which was where I worked in Leeds. I mean, if he'd have been based in Kent, I'd have never met him. I wouldn't have gone to the trouble. So it was all kind of weird, really, that it all kind of fell into my lap, as it were, that I could make contact and get to know him in the last couple of years before he died.
Oh, cool, like it was meant to be almost.
Oh, yeah, it is quite bizarre. I mean, I'm not religious in any way, but if anybody had said that 15 years ago that I'd be talking at the National Press Club where Gorbachev, Reagan, all the presidents have spoken, Nelson Mandela's spoken, I'd have laughed at them because it's bizarre, but, who knows?
Yeah, no, that's right. And when you sort of began to put the database together, I mean, what was the first step? I mean, because it's not every day that anyone, never mind a police officer, sits down and says, I'm going to put together a database of police UFO reports. How did you sort of go about it and, I guess, collate and collect the data and get the word out, etc., as to what you were doing?
Well, what happened was, we're missing little bits out, but cutting to the chase, effectively what happened, when I had the idea for the database, I immediately thought of Graham Birdsall as being the avenue to get the publicity that it needed to the UFO community. Now, bear in mind, I'd never written anything in my life at that point, but when that happened, I had the idea that I went to see him, by which time he'd moved actually closer to where I lived, but he was based at Sturton, which was like an industrial complex just outside Leeds, and it was actually on my patch, as it were. So I would call him for a cup of tea. So I'd got to know him, and I had the idea, and he said, well, you're a credible source, police officers, I'll support you. So he said, go away, write your article. And what I had come across in books over the years were references to a few police officers. The main one that I can think of would be the Alan Godfrey case, which you'll be well aware of. Of course, how strange this is as well, that when I decided to launch the database, I lived in West Yorkshire, still live in West Yorkshire, and guess where he lives? In West Yorkshire. How lucky is that? So, there was kind of a few bits of synchronicity going on. And so really, as I say, I had about half a dozen cases in books. Alan Godfrey's was by far the most well-known. People say write about what you know, and I knew police officers, and I suspected that there literally must be hundreds of police officers over the years, 24/7, 365 days a year, who must see things. That was the idea of the database. So really, the idea was just to collect on and off-duty sighting reports from officers. Okay.
And did sort of being a police officer help you or hinder you at all in collecting reports? I mean,
no. It was a massive advantage because because the real advantage is trying to get professional people, whether it be a pilot, a doctor, somebody in a professional occupation, to actually take the risk of then confiding their particular sighting event to somebody without fear of ridicule or risk to their career. So straight away, as soon as I said I was a police officer, within a minute, people could tell that I was a police officer, because we just have that bond and we could talk about certain things that only police officers can talk about. And so quickly they would say, well, the most common thing would be, well, you're not going to believe me because it sounds crazy. And I'd say, well, believe me, nothing you can say will surprise me. And we just, I've never had a bad conversation with a police officer in the 11 years that I've been doing this. And I would say in all of that time, maybe bar one that I've felt a bit suspicious about on first hearing a phone call and making notes. So that's a pretty good record, I would think. And I took the people out, and they send me photographs in uniform. There's various checks that I could make to confirm who they were. And once they filled in the sighting report form, signed a declaration like a signed statement, and all the other things that I would do, as I would then say, well, and it's actually a part of the sighting report form, do you want to go public or do you want to be anonymous? And the general rule is that if it was a still serving officer, that they would want to be anonymous, but a protected source, but I don't have a problem with that. The press protect their sources. I'll do the same as long as I can verify who they are. And generally, retired officers are more than happy to put their name to a report. But occasionally, you do get certain officers who are willing to go public. It does take some risk for fear of the ridicule factor and potential risk. It was one of the primary reasons why I decided to retire earlier this year, is because in the last 4 or 5 years I was under quite a lot of conditions, and it was very uncomfortable, and I was walking a fine line between that and being disciplined. At one point in late 2009, when the MOD suddenly decided to close the MOD reporting desk facility, I thought, well, what a police force is still going to do? You're still going to get reports. Just because the MOD closed the desk, you're still going to get 300 to 600 reports a year. What are you going to do with them? So I wrote to all the chief constables, and in an off-duty capacity, a private letter, and said, look, I'm an off-duty detective with the British Transport Police. You may not be aware of this, but the MOD has closed the reporting desk. You're still going to get reports. You have to act responsibly, professionally. What are you going to do with them? And basically, I sent out 38 letters initially, and 24 came back, replies within about 2 weeks, saying, thanks for bringing this to our attention. We weren't aware. It's at our command level. We're discussing it. And then I think about a week after that, 2 forces actually adopted me as what's called a single point of contact, a SPOC, which was a major breakthrough. But then the wheel fell off, because it turned out that my chief constable had got a phone call from another chief constable, and I don't know who that was, where he basically said, who's this UFO nut you've got working for you? And because he felt embarrassed, my chief constable, he in his wisdom decided to instigate misconduct hearings, and which took a year to finally come to the hearing. And at the end of it, I ended up getting a 12-month written warning just for writing a private letter, which I'll never quite understand. But you cannot beat a big organisation. So your job was on the line. It was a pressured situation. And it's then that I realised that the writing was on the wall if I wanted to continue with my research to any degree, and therefore just waited till an opportunity arose where I could retire, financially be viable to retire.
Okay. All right, cool. And just sort of going back to, the fact that you've got reports going back to sort of the start of the 20th century, I just wondered, I'm guessing a lot of people probably won't know a great deal about those. Are there any sort of really good, solid, early standout cases that actually sort of predate the modern era of UFOs, involving police officers in Britain?
Well, the only two that are there, and to be fair, the reason why they're on there is because they actually named the officers. They're newspaper reports, but they've actually named the officer. So, you know, what can you do when it's 100 years old? You can't investigate that. You take it on a leap of faith. But the fact that they were named, and the 1901 was actually again in West Yorkshire in a town called Keighley, and basically it names the two officers who were being on beat patrol early hours when they see a cylindrical object with a green like effervescence. You know, it's glowing green and there's no noise, and then it suddenly shoots off into the distance at high speed. Well, some people are naturally going to say, and we're never going to know, but people will say, well, that's obviously an airship. But airships then had an undercarriage without a motor, and it certainly wouldn't have glowed green, and it wouldn't certainly be able to accelerate at a marked speed, noticeable speed. So that's the reason why I included it, because all the circumstances really could have applied to a sighting in the 60s, 70s, 80s, etc. So that's why it's there, because we'll never know. That's the same with when you look at ancient aliens and things like that. I look at through evidential eyes. There are some very puzzling things, but you cannot say for certain what they are, because we'll never know, because we simply can't go back in time. Not that I'm aware of anyway. So it's that kind of thing, So the other report was one over Peterborough in 1909. But again, my research says that in 1909 there were no airships flying over England, even experimental, that could replicate that. Again, we're never going to know, but it's there because it's an historical anomaly.
All right, cool. Just sort of moving away from your police officer-based research for a while, I know you recently attended the citizen hearing over here in the US. Do you have any sort of thoughts or observations, what went on, your thoughts today, looking back at it, etc.?
Yeah, I can honestly say that, and I've been probably doing international lectures for the last 3 or 4 years, that this was by far the most important thing that I've ever been involved in and may ever be involved in the sense of, whilst it was a mock congressional hearing, it was done, from my point of view as a police officer, done very properly. There was a panel of a senator and 5 former congressmen and women. There was a panel of speakers, witnesses. People were sworn in, and it was done at the National Press Club, and it was very akin to being at a hearing of any kind of professional level, and it was done very properly, professionally and properly. I think about 40 witnesses gave evidence. I gave evidence on behalf of police officers worldwide, which was a bit novel. But I can only say that to see a former senator who'd actually ran for the presidency, I think in 2008, Mike Gravel, and 5 congressmen and women actually engaging and talking about pilot cases, dogfights, and listening to the testimony and engaging in Q&A sessions, it was something that you would have never have got in any other forum. You could never have replicated that at any UFO conference. So to actually engage with people who had collectively 80 years of public office service was an amazing thing. And yes, I think there were some mistakes made, but on the whole, it was a massive positive event. I think within a day of the first hearing, it was 9 to 5 testimony, 9 through till 5 in the afternoon. And on the end of the first day, there was like a eureka moment when former Congresswoman Carolyn Kilpatrick was doing the summing up for the panel of politicians, and she said, after one day, I've heard the evidence on one day, there should be full congressional hearings. And that was an amazing moment, and everybody started clapping and standing up and whatever, because all it was about trying to show our best evidence, and we never get the chance to show our best evidence collectively. And so for that, it's really unique. at the end of it, 4 of the 6 politicians, it would have been 6 out of 6, but 2 of them had just retired, and as part of their retirement from the Congress, they're not allowed to sign anything within a year. So 4 out of the 6 signed a motion that said we should campaign to the United Nations to have a best evidence hearing at the United Nations, and what it would take was, all it would take is a country, only has to be one, to sign a motion requesting it, and then it would resurrect the Grenada hearing from 1979 with Prime Minister, I think it's Edmund Geary, of Grenada, the country Grenada, and basically that's been lying on file, and if a country nominates and wants it resurrecting, they can go back and have a full conference. Well, what we're hoping for is that politically a South American country is almost certainly going to be the favourite to come forward. So you look at South America, the attitude in South America to the UFOs is completely different from the US and Europe and in Britain. They're very open there, and countries like Mexico, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay are actively studying it and have gone on record saying that their studies indicate ET. The Brazilian UFO group under A.J. Javard, they recently, just a couple of months before the Citizens hearing, sat down with the Brazilian military and defence minister to set out a coordinated plan to reveal everything. Now, you're never going to get this in the States, you're never going to get this in the UK, and so all of those things hopefully will mean that a South American country will nominate a conference at the UN. And if it came around, I'd love to give evidence on police officers' sightings worldwide like I did at the citizens' hearings. But whether people talk about disclosure, whether it's a mythical thing, I don't know. But could something come from that citizens' hearings? I think yes. And whether it's this year, next year, 5 years, 10 years, whenever something does make a breakthrough, they will come back to the citizens' hearings as being the catalyst, as being the first political meeting, as it were, to take things forward, to try to break this embargo of the best evidence.
Okay. So do you think, I guess as a community, we're being kind of guilty, not consciously, but guilty subconsciously of sort of preaching a bit too much to each other rather than looking for alternative ways to, to get the picture out at a bigger level, so to speak?
Well, I think historically, and I think you probably will agree with me, that if you look at the UFO community over the years, it's really often been a group of individuals, and I don't think we're particularly good at pulling together as a UFO community. I think it's been quite divided. It still is. There are quite a lot of different factions, and it's hard to draw it together. But I thought that the citizens' hearings was a really good attempt to present the best evidence to politicians who would normally go nowhere. They wouldn't go anywhere near the subject. So, I think it was a brilliant success for me. And as I say, whether it makes a breakthrough sooner rather than later, I hope so. But I think it will be seen as historic in time. All
right, cool. And moving to a totally different subject, I know you've written a film script all about the famous Rendlesham case. Can you sort of give us background and sort of information on where things are at with it right now?
Well, we've got a pilot for the Flying Lighthouse. It's all organised. I'm joking. I met Colonel Holt, Charles Holt, in a documentary, filming a documentary in December 2007 about Rendlesham, and I met him, and I had the opportunity to spend quite a few hours in the pub with him, believe it or not, before the filming actually began, as we both arrived at the hotel late evening at roughly the same time. And at the end of that first conversation, I said to him, has anybody thought about writing a film script based on what you know of the case, etc.? And he said, no, people thought about writing books, etc., but it's never happened. But nobody's mentioned film. I said, well, I kind of like dabble with writing screenplays. I'd written 3 prior to this, all UFO related, coincidentally. Never meant to be, but that's the way it went. And he said, well, okay, then, you know. So I said, well, what I'll do is I'll go away for about 4 months, 5 months, and review every bit of evidence I can find in the media, books, magazines, etc. I'll review all the evidence, put together a timeline, and then I'll come back to you in a few months' time and start firing questions at you. Is that okay? And he went, yeah, that's fine. And that's exactly what happened. I think it was 4 months later when I'd effectively researched the timeline. And then I just started winging emails to him left, right, and centre, and he would respond. Obviously, there's a time difference, but he would generally respond within hours the next day, and it went on like that. And I think after about a year, I had the first working draft of the screenplay. But as like anything else, things evolve and you redraft, and then other bits of information emerge, and you've got to check those out. And bear in mind that I wasn't, and I'm not a professional screenwriter. So again, what I would do for validation, and it's something I've always done, is I am certainly open to constructive feedback and whatever. So I would send it off to screenwriters and say, would you review this for me and this, that, and the other? And they would come back, and generally it was positive, but they would say, it maybe needs this, it maybe needs that. And again, it's a learning process. But what I can say now is that probably after 5 years, by the middle of last year, I've got several screenwriters who reviewed it who basically said this is pretty good, and it's pretty much there on being ready to pitch to a producer. Now, basically, what they have said is that there's 2 versions of the script now. There's basically a feature film script, a cinema version, as it were, and then people are saying to me, well, actually, if you tell it blow by blow, it would make for a very good docudrama kind of TV series, 2 or 3 part series. Now, people have said to me, screenwriters have said, well, you should keep both, because they're both separate entities. If you want it as a feature film, you have to make it more character driven. And the problem, I wouldn't say it's a major problem, but there is an inherent problem with the Rendlesham stories, because effectively it's an ensemble piece over 3 nights of activity. 3 successive nights. So you've got different shifts, different people coming in and out of the script, and Hollywood would normally like to have a sort of kind of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Harrison Ford kind of hero. Well, we don't ever really get a hero of any type in the Rendlesham story. There are perhaps maybe 3 or 4 characters that I think you can develop, and that is essentially what I've done. So I've chosen 4 characters, 2 principal characters and 2 slightly less principal, to develop their characters. So the theatrical version, the cinema version, is much more character driven, but it's not the big hero that Hollywood would want. Not that I would want Hollywood to make this kind of film, to be honest, because what I don't want it to happen is for it to be maimed and turned into Fire in the Sky, which was, Travis Walton will say that the scenes on the ground were very accurate, but as soon as he got into the abduction phase, it was a load of rubbish. So, that's what Hollywood does, and I'm determined, if I can, to hang on to the story to the point where somebody actually shares my belief that they want to do it for real, because the overriding thing that the screenwriters are still saying is that even though it doesn't follow the classic hero kind of characters, at the end of it, they're still riveted, and they come out at the end of it going, this really happened? And that's the whole point. That's exactly why it should be made into a film for me, because I'm not trying to convince people that E.T. is here, nice though that would be, but realistically, all what I would like to do is to make the man on the street, the woman in the street, think. And if they come out of the cinema going, this really happened, and these people are real, then I would come back at that thinking job done. Because with the beauty of the cinema is that it would go around the world, and you would inevitably be doing the publicity and be talking about it, so it would raise the issue of the subject. And again, because I'm a credible person, then hopefully you're not going to be treated like an idiot. And if people actually liked the film and were amazed at what really went on there, and they came out of the cinema thinking this was real, then so many millions of people all around the world can suddenly have their perceptions changed almost in an instant over a matter of weeks of its release, that there really might be something to this subject. And that's what I'm really trying to do, is to reach a much wider audience than the people that go to UFO conferences.
Okay. And bearing all that in mind, would you say that Rendlesham is like one of the strongest cases for UFO reality in the UK?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah, it's very complicated, because there are so many people involved. It's very complicated because quite clearly some of the men were interrogated, and several people have gone on the record to say they were interrogated, so they corroborate some form of interrogation. It's not just one person that's saying that. There are certainly, with the Holt Memorandum, with that document, I think for me it's by far Britain's most famous UFO document, but arguably I would say it's one of the top ones in the world for the simple reason of what it says in it. It's only got 3 little paragraphs, but what they say is enormous. It says, from the deputy base commander of a nuclear base, and it was a nuclear base because I worked on an identical base at RAF Larbrook in West Germany. It's an identical weapons storage area when I was in the Royal Air Force Police. So we are talking nuclear weapon base here, and what that first paragraph says, written by Holt, is that there was a confirmed landing of something physical landed in the woods that left ground depressions. The second paragraph talks about ground depressions and that the background radiation peaked only 8 times. It's not about how much, it's about the fact that the Geiger counter only peaked in the indentation, the pod marks. That's the key thing, that there was evidence of a blast zone, broken branches, etc., etc. There were physical evidence recovered in terms of the plaster casts, etc. And then, of course, you have Holt on his night going out with a team of specialists. They go to the landing signs, verify that there's ground depressions 2 days afterwards, and then they see UFO, follow it through the trees. They see it in an open field. The UFO is to the left of the farmhouse, and the lighthouse is 6 miles off on the right of the farmhouse. And the red object suddenly divides into 5 white objects that then disappear. Then they cross the field. They go to across the creek up into the second farmer's field, where they see multiple objects in the sky, to the left, to the north, to the south, and then one of the objects comes and stops above their head, shines a beam down from about 1,000 feet, close to where they're stood. Holt is there. He's the deputy base commander of a nuclear facility, and he's thinking, is this a threat? Is this a communication? They're all in awe. And then one of the objects is seen moving towards Bentwaters. He can't see exactly where that is, so he turns his radio frequency to the tower, weapon storage area tower, and he can hear the fact that beams are being shone down from a UFO into the nuclear storage bunkers. Now, that is big news. And for him to write that is an exceptional document, and you really don't get that anywhere. And so for me, it's a much stronger case than Roswell, although that's a brilliant case, but this is a much more modern case with people that are all alive. But it's complicated because clearly there was a cover-up strategy in place, and I would have to say that it's pretty much worked. Holt has always said that the cover-up began with disinformation and people being interrogated, and one of those, he has always said that Larry Warren, with his Capel Green story, was one of those, that he had a false memory implanted. And that, if that is true, then that has worked fantastically well, because it really created the enormous difficulties between all the relevant parties on all the different nights, and people saying, well, you know, it doesn't tally with Larry Warren, you know, what's real, what's not. So I think from a security point of view, that disinformation exercise, if true, worked fantastically well. But the reality is that we're never going to get 100% pieces of the jigsaw in the Rendlesham case. It's too complicated and too much has been lost already. But as was recently, if you go to Robert Hastings' book, UFOs and Nukes, well, he came across the two of the people that were in the air traffic control tower, so not US Air Force police officers, who finally went on the record, were named, and went on the record in his book saying that on the night that Holt was out, they saw a UFO on radar and visually. So again, this is other departments, as it were, corroborating the fact that there was UFO activity at the base. So for me, it's a tremendous case, but very complicated. But I always say to people, if we had a 100-piece jigsaw and we had 70% of the pieces, which is I think where we've got, on 70% of the pieces in that jigsaw, we'd be able to tell you what that picture was about. And I think that's where we're at.
All right, cool. Well, that gives us sort of a good place now to sort of take a break and